And good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, online at bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO, and on the Civic Media app. With former Wausau West head football coach Jason Foster, I'm Chad Holmes. Coming up, we will recap the action of Week 5 of the regular season and also take a look ahead to Week 6, plus our special guest. Coming up at 6:20, it's our coach guest. In fact, it's not a head coach this week. We are going to be talking to the defensive coordinator at Antigo High School. Red Robins back-to-back shutouts the last 2 weeks, including a 24-0 win at previously undefeated Rhinelander last week. We'll talk to the Red Robin defensive coordinator, Al Fredricks, coming up at 6:20. And then coming up at 7:05, it will be our student-athlete guest from Newman Catholic High School, quarterback Tyler Ackermann. He ran for more than 300 yards last week in the Cards' win against Port Edward. So that's all coming up here on this edition of the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio. And Jason Foster, we now are 5 games in. It's now time for 2 pushes. Number 1 for teams, playoff pushes, and number 2, we're getting into some very important games in terms of conference championships.
Yeah, hard to believe it's Week 6, and hard to believe that people can secure playoff berths already this week. So it should interesting matchups.
Well, let's look at last week's games, and we'll start off with the game I was at in Marshfield last Friday night in the Valley Football Association. And it was a very impressive win for the Wausau West Warriors. They came out, had 5 possessions offensively in the first half, scored 5 touchdowns, and shut out Marshfield 35-0. Warriors now 5-0 overall, 3-0 in the VFA. Marshfield 1-4 overall, 1-2 in the conference. Ray Reinick only played the first half, but had 10 rushes, 169 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Our student-athlete guest from last week, Carter Amerson, had what I call the Big High School Sports Show bounce. He caught a 80-yard touchdown pass on the first play from scrimmage for West, had 4 catches, 107 yards, and a touchdown. Jack Kostrowski was not asked to pass a lot, but he was very efficient. 5 of 6 passing for 126 yards and 2 scores. And the Warrior defense held Marshfield to 178 yards of total offense. And I've been seeing Wausau West games for a long time. You've been around Wausau West, obviously, both as a player and a coach for a long time. To go to Marshfield and do that, that was really as impressive a half of football in that first half as we've seen.
Yeah, I've been at West for 12 years now, and this most certainly was the most sound victory for the Warriors over the Tigers. I mean, generally speaking, even when they're down, Marshfield gives you a lot of fight and good athletes, strong, very well coached, and that was definitely a surprising one. I think we jinxed Carter a little bit, though, as he didn't have an interception for the first time all year.
Stevens Point is still undefeated. Again, the Panthers red hot. They've won 4 games in a row. They're now 4-1 overall, 3-0 in the conference. Them and West, the only undefeateds left in the league. And Stevens Point battled DC Everest. It was a nip and tuck game pretty much the entire evening. And in the end, Stevens Point knocked off the Evergreens 28-16. Braylon Smola, he's had some big games this season running the football for Stevens Point. He had 27 carries, 167 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Amon Konopaki had 6 catches, 67 yards, and a touchdown for the Panthers. Quarterback Grant Chardonnay was 14 of 25, 164 yards, 2 touchdowns. Logan George, again, solid at the quarterback position for the Evergreens. George hit on 12 of 21 passes, 167 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. Also added 7 rushes, 72 yards, and a touchdown. And that was pretty much the DC Everest run game. The Evergreens, again, hurt in the backfield. Only 25 rushing yards outside of Logan George. And that's back-to-back weeks for the run game, struggling for DC Everest. But Stevens Point, again, with a big win. And again, shorthanded a bit. Everest, they gave themselves a chance to win into the fourth quarter.
Yeah, the Spash, if you look at the stat line, kind of a rinse and repeat kind of thing right now. When you look at the rushing game, the passing game, the receiving, they're very balanced. It's kind of really impressive to see week in and week out. I'm really looking forward to see them in live action this week. And I think DC Everest, I think that's tough. When you don't get more than 25 yards rushing the ball outside of your quarterback, it's hard to win games, and that's kind of part of their identity. I know Coach Stralo's probably going into those games looking for a little more out of his run game. When you don't get it, you kind of become dependent on the pass, and it makes for a tough night. But, yeah, looks like they played good defense and a good game overall, and I'm sure the Evergreens will bounce back this week.
And it's just tough to replace Caden Bankston. I mean, that's the bottom line. I don't care who you are in the conference. If you lose your number 1 back, it's going to be much more difficult.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. When you look at who he is as an athlete and what he was bringing to the huddle and onto the field, but then when we had him on the show, what a great leader he seemed to be too. So in addition to losing his production, you also lose his leadership, and that's a big void to fill.
Wausau East earns their first Valley Football Association win in a very long time. The Lumberjacks shut out Appleton West 44-0 at Tom Field last week. 2-3 overall, 1-2 in the conference for East. Appleton West struggling 0-5 overall, 0-3 in the conference. It was 38-0 Lumberjacks at halftime. Pacey Weber, 7 of 9 passing, 134 yards, 4 touchdowns. Jesse Nepgezik, 3 catches, 85 yards, and a score for East. Appleton West, 113 yards of total offense. And number one, for East, obviously, they enjoyed getting a win at Tom Field, first home game of the season, getting a conference win for the first time. And you said rinse and repeat. I think it's kind of that way for Appleton West, unfortunately for that group, because it's got to be very difficult to go through what they've been going through the last number of weeks.
Yeah. First off, it looks like a really nice and efficient night again for Pacey Weber. So nice job for him. But I had the opportunity this week to talk to the Appleton West athletic director, and on the positive side, obviously they know that they're probably not going to get any check marks in the W column this year. But it does sound like they've stayed injury free. Mm-hmm. It sounds like they don't have kids quitting on them right now, which are all good signs. So their numbers are decent. They're just playing a lot of young kids, and in this conference, that is a tall task. So hopefully they can keep it rolling and keep their spirits up and the attitude and effort going, and maybe roll that into some positive things for next year.
Hortonville puts themselves in a good position. They are now 3-2 overall, 2-1 in the conference. They win at Wisconsin Rapids Lincoln last week, 27-14. Red Raiders still looking for that first win of the campaign, 0-5, 0-3 in the league. Broden Butson was 10 of 18, 210 yards and 3 touchdowns for Hortonville. Colin Went, 3 catches, 110 yards and a touchdown as well. So Hortonville, again, that's a big win for them, because when you look at the big picture, it keeps them within striking distance. They still have an opportunity to get at least a share of the conference championship, and also moves them a lot closer to the playoffs. And for Wisconsin Rapids, the first of 3 consecutive home games. Despite the record, they still have opportunities, and that's the thing. You look at them, 0-5, 0-3, they still have opportunities as we get into the season. A couple of more home games coming up. You have a couple of games that you consider winnable. The season is not over for Tony Biolo's team.
No, I mean, basically, they've weathered the storm. I think I mean, when you look at some of these other conferences and the games we've looked at to get to week 6,
they played the top 3 teams in the conference.
Exactly, yeah. So those are in their rearview mirror, and they can. And I think having those games at the end, and if you can find a way to get enough wins to make it into the playoffs and get rolling. And from Hortonville, 27 points, throwing the ball really well. I mean, that's a big confidence boost for them. We all know Rapids, if they're anything, they're a solid defensive team. So to score 27 and throw the ball like they did against them, I'm sure they walk out of that game with a lot of confidence as well.
And again, I don't know, we're not over that part of the state. I don't know what's happening, but I was looking at the numbers of that one and did not see Ben Smith's name in the defensive numbers for Hortonville. I don't know whether or not that means he was just out for that game, whether there was something else that, of course, he's a very busy young man with his track and opportunities there, but that's absolutely a factor on how good this Hortonville team is and can be.
Yeah, that's a great point. I did not realize that, and I would say everybody in the conference who has them on their schedule yet's probably keeping an eye on that stat line and watching that film to see if Smith's out there. Great
Northern Conference, Mosinee continues to roll. They knocked off Hayward 44-3, so the long road trip did not cause any issues for Mosinee. Gavin Obremski, 14 of 18 passing, 222 yards and a couple of scores. Keegan Jershely, 5 catches, 95 yards, plus 47 yards rushing and a touchdown. Elliot Yurkovsky had 13 tackles and a sack for Mosinee. It's really interesting. Again, you go back to that game against Stratford where they just didn't play apparently very well. But since then, they have been doing everything very smoothly. It's been a very smooth run the last 4 games for Mosinee.
Yeah, and short of, as we'll talk about later, short of the loss to Edgar, I think Stratford's a really good, proving they're a really good football team. And Mosinee's been able to win the games they should since that Stratford loss. I think I kind of sound like a broken record when I say this, but I think all signs point to that conference championship game between Mosinee and Medford.
Antigo 24, Rhinelander nothing. The Bell game that's played every year between those two schools. Rhinelander drops their first game of the season, 4-1 overall, 2-1 in the conference. Huge win for Antigo in terms of trying to get themselves playoff eligible. 3-2 overall, 2-1 in the conference. Alec Napcavage had 15 rushes, 95 yards for the Robins. Javon Bussey, 10 rushes, 74 yards. Colton Tomei, 4 of 7 passing, 78 yards and a touchdown for Antigo. And Rhinelander could get nothing going rushing the football football. 21 attempts, 21 yards, just 66 yards of total offense. Obviously, we're going to find out what happened with the defensive coordinator of the Robins in a few minutes. But, boy, again, for Antigo, I was, before the season, there was talk that, hey, the numbers are better. It felt like a team that had a little experience back. They ran into a buzzsaw against Whitburn early on, but the last two games, rivalry games, the War on 64 against Merrill, and then the Bell game, shutout and a shutout.
Yeah, I think that, not surprising that Antigo got the win. I thought this one could go either way. Rhinelander came in undefeated, but the fact that they won 24-0, got a shutout against a Rhinelander team that's been scoring some points and doing some things, and obviously with the rivalry, they know each other really well. So the fact that Antigo put on that performance and 21 rushes, 21 yards. I think that speaks to Antigo's defense. I can't wait to hear more about it tonight.
Lakeland got out some of the frustration of the early part of the season, but they don't begin play until week 5. Last season, they didn't win until week 5. This year, they have not won until week 5. Lakeland 35, Merrill nothing. Lakeland now 1-4 overall, 1-2 in the conference. Merrill just struggling offensively, especially 0-5 and 0-3. Jacob Smeltzer was 6 of 21, 75 yards, a couple picks for the Blue Jays. E.J. Wykes had 3 catches for 32 yards for Merrill. But right now, the Jays just are having a hard time scoring points, and it's put a lot of heat on their defense. The defense has played well from time to time. Only gave up 14 against Crandon, only gave up 12 points, I think, against Medford. But you can't win if you don't score anything.
Yeah, and good for Lakeland to get 35 on the board because they had been struggling to score some points early as well. But I would say Merrill's in a tough spot right now. When they start game plan and they have some of these tougher games ahead of them yet as well, they start looking at how many first downs do you get in a half? How many times can you get off the field on third down? How many turnovers? So, yeah, Merrill's got a little bit of a hill to climb.
Medford, again, started slow, but they've won 4 games in a row now. 59-6 against Ashland. Medford 4-1, 3-0 in the GNC. Ashland 0-5, 0-3. And I don't have any numbers, but you can assume they ran the ball well.
Yeah, Medford is kind of gearing up and good program, do good things, and consistent.
Merriwood Conference, we talked about it last week. The start of these teams going head-to-head in big games. All 6 teams went into action last week, 2-0 in the conference. And Edgar and Colby, we marked that one down as a huge matchup. And Edgar gets a little revenge as Colby knocked off the Cats a year ago. But Edgar 27, Colby nothing. Edgar 4-1 overall, 3-0 in the conference. Colby 4-1 overall, 2-1 in the conference. Carter Butt, a former guest on this program, had 22 carries, 108 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But probably even more impressive and maybe even more important, 14 tackles on defense. Leighton Schuett, 4 receptions, 59 yards for Edgar. Gavin Voss held in check the runner for Colby, 20 carries, 49 yards, and Colby just 91 yards of total offense. Boy, we've seen those numbers in the past from Edgar defenses. Had not seen that the last couple of years. It looks like Edgar is rounding into shape, and that's a huge win. And the game was played in Colby.
Yeah, I think this is kind of turning into one of those classic Jerry Sins teams. When you look at even their loss this year, what did they give up? 12 points in that game early in the year. So I think, they played
8 actually. It was 8-6.
8-6. Yeah, just incredible, really impressive. And we all know Colby was undefeated coming in. Colby's a state caliber team or program in the past, year in and year out. So to drop 27, hold them to 91 yards of total offense, I think that Edgar is has a deep playoff run in their future.
A big game as well, I think, for both these teams in terms of trying to get playoff eligible. Abbotsford and Marathon, both teams off to good starts this season. And in the end, Abbotsford with a big second half rallied past Marathon 32-20. So Abbotsford stays undefeated, 5-0, 3-0 in the conference. Marathon now 3-2 overall, 2-1 in the conference. Marathon led 20-12 at halftime, but then outscored in the second half 20-0. Christian Fuentes, another nice evening for Abbotsford, 14 rushes for 112 yards and 2 touchdowns. But just a big win because, again, there's no games you can circle on this Merriwood Conference the rest of the way for anybody that you can say, hey, we're going to get a W. You want to try to get those third conference wins and those fourth conference wins as early as possible. And for Abbotsford, they started 4-0 last year. lost the marathon that started off a poor stretch for them the rest of the season. So obviously another good win for Abby, and now Marathon has some work to do.
Yeah, I think being undefeated at 5-0 and scoring 32 points in a game like this also then opens the door to be competitive in some of these other games down the road, Pittsville and Auburndale, and there should be some good matchups.
In a big one last week, Auburndale and Pittsville. Boy, that was a defensive struggle between a couple of undefeated teams off to very fast starts. In the end, Auburndale comes from behind, beats Pittsville 12-6. So Auburndale still undefeated, 5-0, 3-0 in the league, 4-1 for Pittsville, 2-1. Scoreless first half. Pittsville scored in the third to take a 6-0 lead, and then Auburndale scored once in the third and once in the fourth to win it. Evan Scholl took the rush game on his broad shoulders, 27 rushes, 233 yards and a touchdown for Auburndale. Dawson Luther had 21 carries, 70 yards. Jacob Hardinger, 7 of 12 passing, 106 yards and a score and an interception for Pittsville. But I think these teams, it's obviously tough for Pittsville to lose, but they, again, I think have been one of the more impressive teams in the area so far this season in terms of improvement. And Auburndale found a way. It's not easy. In a low-scoring affair, you fall behind in the third quarter. They were able to respond and earn a big win.
Yeah, I think Pittsville has to come out of this game feeling pretty good as they look at the rest of their schedule. Obviously, some tough ones on there, but if you can play really good defense, I think you can stay in any game. And Auburndale kind of setting themselves up for they're the next one to take a shot at the champion with Edgar. So it should be an interesting matchup.
We got to take a break. We'll have the rest of our Week 5 recaps coming up a little bit later on. But coming up next, we're going to talk about Antigo and the back-to-back shutouts for the Red Robins. We'll be joined by their defensive coordinator, Al Fredrickson, coming up next. It's the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 12. And welcome back. It's the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. Online at bullfallsradio.com. Mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. Coming up a little later in the program, we'll be talking to our student-athlete guest for this week from Newman Catholic High School, Tyler Ackermann. But right now, time for our coach guest for this week. And from the Antigo Red Robins, team that has won back-to-back games by shutout, and find out what's the keys been on the Antigo defense. We're going to talk now to the defensive coordinator of the Antigo Red Robins, Al Fredrickson. And first of all, Coach, thank you very much for spending a few minutes with us.
Well, thanks for the invite.
Absolutely, and obviously must be feeling pretty good after getting wins, and not only wins, but in rivalry games. You had 2 weeks ago, the War on 64 against the Merrill Blue Jays, a 28-0 win, and then last week, a 24-0 win up in Rhinelander in your annual Bell game. I guess right now, if it's a rivalry game, the Antigo Red Robins are coming out very strong. What's been the key the last 2 weeks?
The key is we're starting to come together as a team, and we started out the season a little bit rough with some non-conference games, and we kind of narrowed it down to we got to decide not to worry about who we're playing. We got to start thinking about ourselves as individuals. We have to get better for the team, and then we have to gel as a team. And as soon as we kind of switch focus there, then we start coming together and playing as a unit.
Coach, great back-to-back wins, great rivalry wins, but most impressive to me is the shutouts, and in particular, going up against a Rhinelander team that came into the game undefeated, and to come out of that game with a 24-0 shutout. What was your game plan? Well, how were you able to keep Rhinelander off the board last week?
Well, as we all know, Rhinelander switched to the wing tee, and that is defending that. You have to take away their gaps and angles. And that was the biggest thing up front is everyone had a role, and the linebackers had to fill, and it was obvious we did our job and stuck to the game plan, and they stuck together.
Who are some of the kids on the defensive side of the football that have been important cogs in terms of the solid play so far in the first 5 games?
Well, start with one of the linebackers, Alex Schleve. He was all conference last year as a junior. He's kind of the leader of the group. If you would say Alex Schliebe, he would be a definition of an Antigo football player. He gets after it. Up front, Alex Potts, one of our DN, playing strong. Grant Stallwich has been turning it up. Jason Airwood, our Sam linebackers, kind of cranked it up in the sack department. So those are some of the kids, and I'm really proud of our defensive backs back there, holding tight, locking in on those receivers.
Yeah, Coach, you mentioned the definition of an Antigo football player, and Antigo football obviously has as much tradition as any program in central Wisconsin here. What role does that play? Like when you look at kind of a rough season last year, the last couple of years, and being where you're at right now, what did you guys do this offseason? What did you guys do to get back to kind of your roots and that tough, hard-nosed Antigo football? What is the recipe for success over there?
I guess we kind of looked at our culture and how it was going, and it was going the wrong direction. And I guess we put some priorities in line. And on the defensive side, we looked at our defense and we structured it towards the type of kids, and we've always been an aggressive defense. And we just changed some things, but the biggest thing is our culture. We're on time. We show up for class on time. We do our homework. That's been a big stressful point this year.
Again, we're talking to Al Fredrickson, the defensive coordinator for the Antigo Red Robins, here on the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. Kind of piggybacking on that point about the Antigo tradition. I grew up in this area back in the 80s. I was going to school here in central Wisconsin, DC Everest, and remember some of the massive games that Antigo would have against Everest and against Stevens Point. Do the kids realize the tradition of Antigo? Is that something that's still part of the DNA within the student body? I imagine it's still very much part of the DNA of the town, but how much do the current members of the Antigo football program know of the history of Antigo football?
Well, they see the trophies, they see the banners. Kids kind of don't really look in the past. They look towards the future, right. And they know we have a tradition. It's talked about, their grandparents or their dad has talked about it. They know it's there, but we kind of approach it, it's your time. It's your grass to play on. And we're getting back to that, and that's why we stress to the kids. We got to change that culture. We have to get back to the old blue-collar way. We don't need to be fancy. We just get after them and get the job done.
Showing a little toughness, I think, probably was something that was needed after the first game of the season. You faced, obviously, a very good Wittenberg-Burnhamwood team that's been stellar in the first 5 games of the season. Obviously, when you're coming off a tough season in terms of wins and losses, trying to build a little confidence, trying to build the foundation, it can be tough when you take one on the chin in week 1. How did the kids and the coaches and everybody handle that, to know that, hey, number 1, that's a really good opponent, and number 2, to take away something from those experiences in week 1 as you continued into the season?
Okay, week 1, we looked at the film and looked at some of the things we really needed to work on. And I guess it's always been my approach is, okay, once the film is done, once corrections are done, that week is over. We're looking on to the future, and that's where we started talking about we got to get better as individuals, and it's going to help the team. So, we try to stay positive and teach. And that was the other thing about the coaches. We agreed we got to become better teachers out there, so the kids understand what we want them to do.
Yeah, Coach, I love what you said, and part of the thing I like about this show is we talk about things that I don't think all listeners kind of quite understand of what goes into building a football team and a football program. But I love what you said about how you guys went back to basics and focusing on being students and showing up on time, showing up on class to time, getting their homework done, getting back to your blue-collar roots. How did all of those things transfer into your offensive game? I look at the real nice balanced running attack with Bussey and Nap Cabbage, I think I got that right?
Yeah, Nat Cabbage, you're correct.
And then being really efficient in your passing game as well. 24 points, that's a nice offensive output. What went well last week?
What Well, our offensive line is starting to improve, and they're starting to gel and starting to talk on the line of scrimmage and work out things. Running backs are the mesh between the quarterback and the running backs are coming. So I guess we went back to the basics there, just improving, starting from the offensive line and working back.
Again, we're talking to Antigo D coordinator Al Fredricks here on the Big High School Sports Show. Can you tell the listeners out there who may not be part of the Antigo community or part of the Rhinelander community what the Bell game is all about, how big that game is? It's been one of the longest running rivalry games in the state of Wisconsin. What is the significance of the Bell game?
The Bell started way back. I think it's like 1908 or something back there. The Bell itself came off of a ship, and there was always a rivalry between Rhinelander and Antigo, and this guy that owned the ship said, "Hey, let's start the Bell game," and that's how they kind of started. And it's kind of like it's a huge pride thing between the two towns. So that's how it started. Is it fun
to take that Bell, especially when you win it in Rhinelander back to Antigo? It's almost it's got to be great no matter where it is. But in a sense, you take it from their stadium and bring it back home. I imagine everybody as part of that squad was very excited last week.
Oh yeah, kids get into it. It's one of their highlights. One of those things you circle on the calendar. And I ended up being pretty good friends with Aaron over at Rhinelander, the head coach, and it's even better when when we do well against him.
I would imagine it's also nice during basketball games in the winter and volleyball games in the fall too.
It gets brought up in the crowd. You hear the kids chant.
That's awesome. So, kind of turning the page on to this week, got the T-Birds on the schedule. They came off a nice win last week, getting their first W of the year, scoring 27 points. What are you expecting out of
35? Actually,
35 points. Yeah. So what do you?
35-0.
Well, yeah, shutout, 35 points. What are you expecting out of the T-Birds, and what's your game plan heading into this week?
All right. I'm a type of coach. I look at the history, and you go back last year, they had the same schedule. They had a brutal schedule with Moseley and Medford right away. Let's face it, those are the two top teams in the conference, and they started a run with us. They beat us 20-0. I kind of look at them as like a wounded bear right now. I mean, they just got after Merrill 34-0 and 35-0, and we better have it strapped on tight. I think Dan and the boys are going to come to town, and it's going to be a physical game.
When you look at the league itself, is there much change? I mean, it's been Moseley and Medford for a while. Obviously, I think you would love to kind of knock your way into that upper tier. I think Lakeland has been sort of around there as well. When you look at the league, is it still just trying to chase down Moseley and Medford and try to kind of break up that party that's been at the top of the league here for a number of years?
Yeah, we always want to be a part of breaking up that party, but on paper right now and on film, those are the two best teams, but that should be an attainable goal, and that's where we want to improve and be able to compete with those teams.
Taking a look at the big picture in terms of the program, in terms of taking those steps, how have the numbers been? How do you feel about some of the lower levels? Is the program going in the right direction where you feel like you can take those steps forward? Because obviously this year you've been able to use, I think, a little bit of experience, may have been some hard-earned experience to be back into the mix for a playoff berth. How does the Antigo program stand right now? What do you think it's going to be going in the future?
I think that the numbers up at the 7th and 8th grade, I believe we have 68 kids total there. We have 15, 16 at the freshman level. JV, we're playing three teams. I mean, JV2 and varsity. I think it's on the upper swing. I think our head coach, Tom Schofield, is a very positive person in the building. He's our AD also. Works his tail off. I mean, that's one of his big concerns and his goal is to have three levels of football there. And I think we're starting to see the results of his hard work and the other assistant coaches, Mike Waniger and Chris Lucas. I mean, we're constantly looking how we can improve and keep it going.
What types of things did you guys do from last season to this season? Like, what is in a school the size of Antigo, with the tradition you have, and I'm sure your athletes play a lot of different sports. What was most important that happened from the end of last season to the beginning of this season to start taking those steps in the right direction?
And with what we did was we kind of looked at last year and go, okay, what do we need to do different? How can we improve it? And I think we kind of, in my case, I looked at in the mirror and go, what do I got to do better as a defense coordinator and an offensive line coach? I mean, I think we came up with some great ideas, and Coach Schofield and I are always talking. The offense, he's the old coordinator, so I think the talk never stops about how we can improve and what we're going to do. So I think it's always on our mind.
And what does a couple of wins like the last 2 weeks do for the confidence level of guys that may have had a few bumps and bruises over the last couple of years in the GNC? Do you sense it? Do you sense a growing confidence with these young men?
I think how you sense is how much fun the kids are having. And right now we're having a lot of fun. I mean, they're smiling on the faces, and I think they're kind of getting it. We can, joke around in practice, but they're starting to figure out when it's time to work. They get to work right away, so they're kind of locked in. That's what you're seeing.
Talking about, you had said you're kind of the historian, or you like to look back to the trends of last year's schedule and how matchups went last year. Knowing that you guys took one on the chin from the T-Birds last year, do you guys use that as motivation with the kids? Do the players and the athletes remember that game and kind of look for some revenge factor this week?
Yeah, we talked about, a matter of fact, tonight about that, and I told them kind of the history, and I said, hey, they're coming in here to keep their momentum going. I mean, I told them we better strap it up. Yes, we use that quite a bit.
Anything else, Coach Foster?
No, Coach, it's been great talking to you. Great start to your season here, and look forward to seeing how the game goes Friday night. Good luck.
All right, thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Again, that's Al Fredrickson, defensive coordinator for the Antigo Red Robins, as the Red Robins winners of back-to-back games by shutout, both on the road, up in Merrill, 28-0 2 weeks ago, and 24-0 up in Rhinelander in the Bell game last week. So now they're 3-2 overall, and 2-1 in the Great Northern Conference, getting set to play host to the Lakeland Thunderbirds coming up on Friday night. We're going to take a quick timeout and then come back, continue our recap of the action from last week in high school football. Again, we will be joined by our student-athlete guests coming up in just a little bit at about 7:05. Tyler Ackermann, the quarterback, also linebacker. He's played some defensive lineman. He's played all over the place for the Newman Catholic Cardinals. We'll have Tyler Ackermann coming up at 7:05. He's Jason Foster. I'm Chad Holmes. It is the Big High School Sports Show here on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, online at bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO, and on the Civic Media app. Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. Online at bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO, and on the Civic Media app. With former Wausau West head football coach Jason Foster, I'm Chad Holmes. And Coach Antigo, we haven't, even before your first year, the last few years have not had Antigo guests because they've been struggling. It's been a real tough go of it for the Red Robins. And as you said, and as I said, I mean, boy, they were involved in huge games. I mean, they would come play at DC Everest. They'd come and play at Stevens Point and Rapids, and they would be a team to beat. They would find their way. Back in the day when there was one team that would make the playoffs, you'd have massive games in the Wisconsin Valley Conference, and I know a lot of folks in Antigo remember that, and they want to try to get back to that, but it has been a struggle in recent years. And to see what they're doing, I like to see that. You like to see where you're not seeing the same results every year. And it looks like Antigo is taking a few steps forward, and right now have put themselves in a pretty good position to earn a playoff spot.
Yeah, back in the day, Coach did a great job. I loved hearing him talk about tradition and blue collar and toughness. And back in those huge games, they'd roll up in their bus and 25 to 30 guys would get off, and they just pound knobs on your head. It was great football, and it's great to see them come back. I love that their head coach's last name is Schofield, and I think that certainly does not get lost on people. I think Tommy's doing a great job over there, and they're definitely heading in the right direction.
What is his relation to Gordy?
It's his grandson.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I mean, Gordy Schofield, man, I mean, he was the legend for so many years in Antigo, and they'd had the matchups with Wayne Steffenhagen at Everest, with Fitzgerald over at Stevens Point, Beagle at Wisconsin Rapids. I mean, you talk about kind of Mount Rushmore names in Wisconsin Valley Conference football in that era. These guys, I mean, they went at it fire and tong every week and every year.
Our principal at Wausau West, his name is Jeb Steckbauer, kind of a pretty prominent Antigo name from an athletic standpoint, and I love hearing stories. Things have obviously changed a lot in athletics over the years, so when different situations come up, I love to hear Jeb give me Gordy stories about what do you think Gordy would have thought of this, or how do you think Gordy would have handled this situation, and get to hear good old days stories about Gordy and how things ran in Antigo at the time.
In fact, I remember back, because I went to Everest, and it was around, I was not a football player, and this was not big enough and not tough enough, but I remember a year, I don't know if I was in junior high or high school, where there was an Everest Antigo game they actually televised on Channel 7. I mean, it was such a big game. They televised it on Channel 7. Before that was, they had streaming and all this other stuff. So, again, and for the Great Northern Conference, we've seen Merrill, I've seen Mosinee and Medford, those M teams, be the powerhouses. Somebody's got to step up there and kind of break this up at some point. I mean, we know what the target is. I think everybody knows what the target is in the Great Northern Conference, and it's time, I think, for somebody to try to break into that power and into that party.
Yeah, if you truly do dig into the history a little bit, and you look at the Rhinelanders, the Antigos, the Merrills, those are old WVC teams who've all had nice runs at one time or another in the conference. And then you look at the rest of those teams are old lumberjack teams, and well, except for Mosinee, and you look at Lakeland had some really
Overbelt.
Yeah, Lakeland had some nice runs over the years. Ashland has state championship teams. Obviously, that's going to change a little bit next year with the new conference.
That's
but
true.
Yeah, there's great to see one of those old WVC teams step it up and maybe make a run at the top.
Well, let's continue looking back at last week's action. Central Wisconsin Conference and the CWC Large. There was a massive game in Amherst, the Wittenberg-Burnhamwood Chargers and the Amherst Falcons, and it went right down to the final play. 1 yard between victory and defeat, and in the end, it was Wittenberg-Burnhamwood with the goal line stand to hold off Amherst 27-22. So that means the Chargers are now 5-0 overall, 3-0 in the CWC Large. Amherst 2-3 overall, 1-2 in the league. Don't worry too much about Amherst at this point because they're 2 losses to Wittenberg-Burnhamwood and Stratford. So they've gone through the big 2, but it does mean that they're going to have to kind of make sure they take care of business the rest of the way. Amherst led 22-15 after 3 periods. Nathan Wapenikene, 11 of 19, 157 yards, 2 touchdowns, a pick for Whitburn. Also added 16 rushes, 92 yards, and a touchdown. Casey Kielman, 4 catches, 104 yards, and a touchdown for Wittenberg-Burnhamwood. The thing that kind of jumps out as well is the first time this season that Wittenberg-Burnhamwood had to play into the fourth quarter. And not only that, they were down going into the fourth quarter. They scored 2 touchdowns to come from behind and then get the goal line stand at the end. Sometimes it's not easy when you win in basically running clock to then play a game for 4 quarters, to have the intensity for 4 quarters, to have to extend that energy against a good football team for 4 quarters. And Wittenberg-Burnhamwood obviously did it very well.
Yeah, I mean, every week when we do the recap, I look at one of the games and I think, God, I wish I were at that game. And I think this is the one last week when you look at one final play of the game is the difference between Wittenberg and Amherst both being 2-1 in conference, and maybe what that looks like down the road from a playoff seeding and different, and where that puts Wittenberg as they look ahead to Stratford yet this season. Yep. So it is a big game. Amherst is a really good football team, great football program. They're gonna come around, but I'm sure they will lose some sleep over that last play of the game for certain.
Stratford continues to be Stratford. They had that one game that somebody got into their uniforms against Edgar. It didn't look like Stratford, but otherwise they have been outstanding, defending state champs, 44-0 winners against Shiocton. So Stratford now 4-1 overall, 3-0 in the CWC Large. Shiocton 1-4, 1-2 in the league. Jack Tubbs 5 of 7, 121 yards and 3 touchdowns. Kohler Kilty 19 rushes, 146 yards and a touchdown for Stratford. It was one of those rare Saturday afternoon games for the Tigers, and they looked like Stratford, and they have looked like Stratford. Tubbs has been solid. Kilty is going to be Kilty. He's going to be a handful for everybody else, and the defense, again, outside of the Edgar game, has been very good.
Yeah, I talked with their athletic director who also helps out Coach Craig Martin's former Mosinee head coach yesterday, and he said they're rolling, like they're healthy, they're looking good, and I mean that balance, 5 for 7. 121 yards, 3 touchdowns throwing the ball, and then Kilty's going to rush for 150 on 20 attempts. That's going to be really tough to stop down the road.
And likely in just one half.
Yes,
most
likely.
So he probably got all of his work done in the first half and was able to put up some very good numbers. Wyowega Fremont, 5-0. 3-0 in the conference. They're trying to bang into that big three of the top of the CWC large. Looks like Wyowega Fremont. Can't forget about them with Stratford and Whitburn in terms of the conference race. They shut out Spencer Columbus 55-14. Spencer Columbus still looking for their first win of the season. Cameron Zilke put up massive numbers for Wyowega Fremont. 14 of 19 passing, 247 yards, 4 touchdowns, 9 rushes, 78 yards and 2 scores, 6 touchdowns combined. Braden Arndt, 5 catches, 94 yards and a touchdown for Wyowega Fremont. And just generally, I know last season was their big step forward. You still don't know as much about Wyowega Fremont because they've kind of burst in there, but right now they're doing everything to show that they're going to be a factor with Wittenberg and with Stratford as we continue.
Yeah, I think this is kind of the eye-opener team in this conference. Obviously, they got 3 really big games left on their schedule, which potentially will balance things out, or maybe they'll prove that they do belong in the top 3 in that group. But I've been really impressed with them to this point and kind of look forward to seeing how they go moving forward.
And the thing that I notice with some of these teams are the teams that are able to throw the ball and run the ball. And with Zilke, he's put up some big numbers throwing the ball. He's been able to run it with some help as well. Again, you said it. I mean, this week they will not. I think they have Shiocton this week, and then the final 3 games of the season are the big 3. You talk about having it in your own hands. They're going to have it in their own hands. But to be able to compete against really good teams, and you know this, you have to have more than one gear. You have to be able to have more than one card to play. You have to have many different ways to try and skin a cat, as I try to use every possible silly way of describing it. But they do seem to have a little bit of balance in terms of their offense.
Yeah, and they should get a win this week. I mean, even though those are 3 tough games at the end of the year, they're going to go into them 6-0 and 4-0 in the conference, and that's a ton of confidence. And the other thing that kind of sticks out to me week after week as we look down these stat lines is 14 for 19, 247 yards. I mean, when did these quarterbacks become so efficient? I mean, I don't know if that speaks more to the defense or the offense, but even if you're playing 7-on-7 with no pads on, those are pretty impressive numbers.
And Nakusa goes to 2-3 overall, 1-2 in the CWC Large after beating Manawa 36-17. But the unusual part of that game is Manawa led 17-0 after 1 quarter. So that means in the final 3 quarters, Nakusa outscored Manawa 36-17. And obviously a big first win in the conference for Nakusa. CWC Small, Iola Scandinavia. Boy, Assumption right now defensively just seems to have no answers. They've been giving up lots of points, and they gave up lots of points again last week. Iola Scandinavia, 48, Assumption 15. And before we actually start talking about all these games, all these teams in the CWC Small started 0-2 because they had those crossovers with Marathon, with Amera Wood. They didn't all play Marathon, just Amera Wood. So they all know that they have to do well within these conference games in order to become playoff eligible. I think it's a little unfair for these teams, obviously, obviously, I get playing CWC Small. They get a powerhouse conference like the Merriwood, but fortunately, this is the final season of that occurring. But IS over Assumption, 48-15, 2-3, 1-2 in the league for IS. Assumption 1-4 overall, 0-3 in the conference. Jensen Rice, 15 rushes, 188 yards, 4 touchdowns. 3 of 4 passing, 78 yards and a touchdown as well for Iola Scandinavia. Manny Schultz for Assumption, 13 rushes, 159 yards and a touchdown. Iola, I'm not surprised. They played some really good competition this season. I still think they're a team that is in pretty good spot to make a pretty good run now in the CWC Small. And Assumption, coming into the year, they have been the team in the CWC Small, and right now they just are having a hard time stopping anybody.
Yeah, interesting to see what Assumption's numbers are and what they turned over from last year to this year. But Iola Scandinavia, and I think the next team too, Pacelli, I think they're kind of going to maybe battle this out for the CWC Small Championship.
And Pacelli did get their first conference win last Thursday night, beating Rochelle 35-12. Pacelli 2-3. Overall, 1-2 in the conference. Rochelle now 0-5 and 0-3. Bryce Flaker, 28 rushes, 142 yards, and 2 touchdowns for the Cardinals. Logan Mayer had 3 catches, 74 yards, and a couple of scores. And Eli Bierenkott had 13 tackles for Pacelli. And I think you're right that Pacelli is a team that last season they started off very slowly, again with these crossover games and tough non-conference games. And that's the thing right now with the way that high school football is, that we're seeing teams that are a game under 500 in their conference be playoff eligible. So everybody's, as slow a start as some of these teams are having, if they get the schedule to fall the right way, and if they are able to come together as a team, really nobody is really totally out of the playoff race, even at this point of the season.
Yeah, I always go back to Rice Lake over there and they'll come back next year, but when they used to be in the big rivers over there, and they compete all year long in those really close games against really close teams and win enough games to make the playoffs, and then more often than not find themselves in level 4 down in Madison for a state championship. So I think that's kind of the model, unfortunately, that these teams have to follow right now until they're in a better situation from a conference standpoint.
Loyal was supposed to take on Wild Rose. Wild Rose, of course, has left. They're playing 8-player football this year, so Loyal had to find an opponent. They knew they had the conference win, but they found a very tough opponent, Coleman. Coleman, 4-1 on the season, defeated Loyal 55-6, 451 yards rushing on 42 attempts for Coleman. Coleman's interesting because they always have a pretty good wrestling team, and that always seems to lead to good rushing numbers for their football team. I think there's a correlation there, isn't there?
Yeah, I coached with a guy up at Northland Pines when I was there who's a Coleman grad, and he loved himself some Coleman Cougars. But traditionally, you look at that old conference, Coleman and Bonduel, and those teams battled it out for conference championships all the time. And it's a tough situation for Loyal. You go in, you know you're getting the win. You lose a game, so you look like crazy to find a replacement game, and the only one you can find is somebody you're probably going to get a good thumping from. So I give them a lot of credit, because the alternative is to just take the win and not play the game. So good for them to give those kids the opportunities to get on the field and play some football last Friday night.
8-player last week. Central Conference, Newman Catholic beat Port Edwards 40-12. Newman now 2-2 overall, 1-0 in the conference. Port is 2-2 overall, 0-1 in the league. Our guest coming up in a few minutes, Tyler Ackermann, had 23 carries for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns, added 9 of 17 passing, 142 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Cardinals had 378 yards rushing as a team, 520 yards of total offense for Newman. And I did this game Saturday afternoon. Number 1, Ackermann, again, has been consistently outstanding. He's been asked to do a lot. He's carried the ball a lot. He's thrown the ball a lot. He's really a two-way performer when it comes to the offense. And also, it's a team that, again, I've said this before, they lost every starter. This is not the team that won the state championship a year ago, but they're getting better. And that's right now, and Coach Mickling and his squad are going in the right direction.
Yeah, that's what you do. Every game's a preseason game, right? Until you get to the playoffs, and they just keep getting better every week. They watch their film, they prepare, and I don't care what kind of football you're playing. 300 yards rushing is nice of him to let somebody else get 78 yards, or a couple of guys 378 total, and for him to account for 400 and almost 450 yards and 4 touchdowns. That's a heck of a game. Knowing that he also plays defense for him too, that's a heck of a day.
Coming up this week will probably be the conference championship game in that league when the Cardinals go to Alman Bancroft. Almond-Bancroft defeated Tri-County by a score of 40-6. Almond is now 3-1 overall, 1-0 in the conference. Tri-County 0-3 and 0-1. Wild Rose also in the Central, and again, they were supposed to be in the CWC Small. They are kind of replacing Bowler Gresham, who is not playing a season this year. They're kind of filling in those weeks. They beat Marion Tigerton 42-12. So Marion Tigerton still gets a W in the conference, but they're 2-2 overall. CWC East, Owen Withey. They really Terry Lobby has been a long-time coach over there. They're 3-1, 1-0 after shutting out Athens 49-0. But see some of these teams. Yeah, Gilman beating Greenwood 61-0. Thorpe over Alma Center Lincoln 74-16. Those three teams in the CWC East, former Cloverwood teams, former teams that faced Newman and Assumption and other teams from the Cloverwood for a number of years. 8-player got a lot stronger with these teams coming in.
Yeah, and I think we'll create some great matchups. I want to see when 61 meets 74 on the same night. Who comes out of that one?
And that's basically a look at where we stand. And we actually got a couple of minutes before we have to take a break. We're now 5 weeks into the 11-man season. We're exactly halfway into the 8-player season. As a coach, what do you know? What do you don't know? How do you feel at this point of the season? Because obviously you had the training camp. You now had 5 weeks of play. And now it's sort of like the big push, isn't it? The big push towards the end of the regular season.
Yeah, I mean, you put a ton. I mean, high school football is just wild with the amount of time and effort that the coaches and the players and the leadership put into it. And you come into the season and you kind of have an idea of where you're at and where you want to be. And now's your midpoint check on that. Are we where we thought we were? Are we better, maybe a little better than we thought we were going to be, or do we have some work to do? And this was always the time of year when you start looking at playoff qualification. Right. Where are we at? And if you are a consistent playoff contender, then it starts looking at how many do we need to win to make sure we get a home game or make sure we get 2 home games. And obviously the computer makes that decision for us now. But yeah, it is kind of that really, it's a litmus test halfway through to see where we're at. Are you meeting or exceeding or not meeting your expectations? And what can you do at this point? You do a lot of work in the off season to make a lot of big changes. What can you do in a short period of time to make those little changes to get you over the hump?
And finally, in our final seconds of this segment, I think 4 of the teams that kind of made statements last week. In the VFA, I thought Wausau West going to Marshfield and dominating was a statement. I think that Edgar going on the road to Colby in the Merriwood, that was a statement. I think Wittenberg-Burnham winning at Amherst in the CWC Large was a statement. And I think Iowa Scandinavia has proven themselves as the best in the CWC East. Those 4, I thought, were statement games.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more in all of those. And I think I'd throw Spash in there as well. I think that was another tough matchup, 2 undefeated teams, knowing that whoever came out of it was in the driver's seat for still being able to control their own destiny for a conference championship, and a really nice win for them. So, yeah, there were some big wins last week, just like there will be some great matchups again this week.
We're going to take a break for a quick news update and then come back for the second hour of the show. We'll look ahead to next week's action, and coming up next, it will be our student athlete guest for this week from Newman Catholic High School, coming off a big win and a big performance against Port last Saturday, Tyler Ackermann. That's coming up next here on WXCO. And welcome back. It is hour number 2 of the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. Online at bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO, and on the Civic Media app. With former Wausau West High School head football coach Jason Foster, I'm Chad Holmes. And we always start off the second hour of the program with our student athlete guest. And this week, very happy to welcome into the studio the Newman Catholic Cardinal junior quarterback, lineman, sometimes linebacker, sometimes defensive lineman, former offensive lineman, done it all, Tyler Ackermann. Tyler, thanks for coming on over.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Let me ask you first, how many positions have you played as a varsity football player?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I mean, last year I was at line for a little bit, and linebacker. I mean, outside linebacker, sometimes I was kind of DB/linebacker. A lot, all over the place, yeah.
I always give Coach Johnson a hard time at Wausau West as the offensive coordinator. He's got a knack for turning linemen into quarterbacks or running backs into linemen or whatever. And when I heard that earlier this year, when I said that, well, he could play for us. We love turning linemen into skilled players. And our freshman quarterback last year is playing left tackle on our JV team this year. So same thing. But congratulations on an incredible performance last week. I mean, that's mind blowing to me to rush for 300 yards and throw for another 142 and 4 touchdowns. What's it like to be that multifaceted, run, pass, and play such a huge role in your offense?
It's great. I mean, that's just following our game plan. That's following what Coach Miklick and everybody at our coaching staff puts forward for us, and that's communicating with our line up front. I mean, I can't rush for 300 without those guys up front, and I can't throw for 140 without guys catching the ball. So that's everybody being on the same page and doing what we're supposed to do.
Often when you become a new starting quarterback, it's after spending time on the sideline. But you played last season. You played on the line. You were in the huddle during the run to the state championship. How much has that helped you transition to the starting quarterback position? Does it make it a lot easier to step in and be in a better position to succeed quicker?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, being in there last year, watching what Connor did and what Thomas did and all those guys did with all that experience helped me just kind of get into it this year. And having that to go off of, knowing what the expectation is when you're in that varsity huddle is something that is I was appreciative to have last year for sure.
Real quickly before Jason jumps in, Newman has had a lot of really solid quarterbacks, and one of them was named Ackermann.
That's right.
So did your brother give you, even before you started playing varsity football, being around him, knowing what he was doing to prepare to be a quarterback for Coach Miklick and for Newman Catholic, how much did that help? And obviously, your dad being on the staff as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've been around the program for a long, long time, so I know what the expectations are, and having that is something that's pretty cool. So I'll take what I can get for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, Newman football is synonymous with championships over the last 5 years. This year's a little bit different. Like, you guys had a long run of a group of guys who did a lot of good things, of which you played an important role and were part of last year. It's different this year.
Yeah.
Tell me about that process, and tell me what your role in it has been and what's needed to happen to get you guys to where you're at right now. Kind of took some lumps early in the year against really good programs, but now you've righted the ship and heading in the right direction. What needed to happen as a leader and as a team to get where you're at now?
Well, I mean, even in the summertime, we knew that we were obviously losing a huge senior class, so we knew everybody needed to step up in some form or fashion. So we were all really hyping on everybody to get in the weight room and get to our speed camps and stuff. So we tried to put in as much work we could in the summertime, and then getting through week 1 and week 2, knew we had some tough matchups, and we just didn't perform to our best ability. So we knew that we needed to step it up for week 3 and week 4. So we made sure that everybody was doing what we could do, so we could get some wins. Yeah.
Talking to Newman Catholic's Tyler Ackermann here on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230 so far this season. Tyler, 690 yards rushing in just 4 games. Also has thrown for 576 yards and 5 touchdowns, so off to a very good start. Cardinals taking on Elman Bancroft coming up on Friday night. But you're a two-way player. You played, offense and defense last year as well. I mean, You had a big game early. Was it 3 Lakes or Florence? Was it Florence?
I think it was 3 Lakes.
3 Lakes. You had a couple of pick sixes this season. I've seen you start on the defensive line. You've been playing some linebacker. You can play back in the secondary as well. Talk about the defensive aspect. I mean, you've been asked to wear a few different hats defensively. How would you describe yourself as a defensive football player? What do you think you do best? What are you being asked to do this season on defense?
I mean, what I would do best. I like playing every spot they have, whatever they put me at. I like going on the line. That's where I started in elementary school and stuff, and then going back to linebacker is really fun as well. And then going in coverage is great too. So I love being anywhere. Coach Thorpe runs a great defense. So it's just wherever he wants to put me to best succeed.
Mentally, being a two-way player, and it's an opportunity. I mean, that's probably one of the good things about playing at Newman Catholic, and I think for a lot of the other small schools around central Wisconsin is having all the opportunities that you have. Is that something that you really savor, or are there moments you're saying, I need a blow?
No, I mean, I love it. It's great. I mean, like last year, I was in every play, I think, besides like extra point or something, which is super fun, because, I mean, yeah, you get tired and stuff, but you're in every play. I mean, if I'm playing football, I want to be in every play, and that's something that we all appreciate for sure. It's good. It's fun. It's a good time.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, like, the supporting cast, like, you can't do it without a good solid line. You can't do it without receivers catching the ball. And on the other side, the three levels as well, linebackers and D-backs. Tell me about some of those other guys. Who are the other key players or important pieces of Newman Catholic this year?
I mean, we got Quincy Fender at wide receiver. He's just a sophomore, young guy stepping up. He's a great athlete. He's doing great. Carson Rice is kind of like our tight end flex position kind of guy. He's doing a great job. He's definitely put on a lot of weight in the weight room and getting a lot stronger. And Aiden Spicala is a senior this year, but this is his first year ever playing football ever, and he has made leaps and bounds of being a great athlete and being a good football player. I mean, he's a really good player. We're happy to have him. And our running back, we have Griffin Pent right now. Matthew Meyer, the senior, went down with a broken arm, but he stepped up too, another sophomore. Stepped up into a big role and is a good athlete who's doing good for us. And I mean, on the line we have Carson Callow, Evan Graney, and Greg Zabrowski, and they're all guys that are all getting better and better as the year goes on. So, yeah.
In terms of developing chemistry with your receivers, as you said, these are two new receivers. Actually, you can say three new receivers starting that you're throwing to, and especially with Aiden, as you said, he did not play football previously. Quincy was now a sophomore, so obviously was not a big factor a season ago as well. I know during the summer you're playing 7-on-7. You've had off-season workouts. You have preseason camp. Could you talk a little bit about how you, as a quarterback, tried to develop that chemistry with your teammates, both in terms of knowing where they're going to be and throwing the football and having that connection, but also quarterback is asked to be a leader. And obviously with you being the one guy that did play significant amounts of football a year ago, probably being asked to be maybe a bigger leader than a normal junior would be. Yeah. Talk about building the chemistry within your receivers and I guess generally as a team.
Yeah, I mean, it's just being around the guys, getting reps. Like, I mean, for example, over the summertime after weight room, we have the opportunity to go and run some routes, and we don't have to. Coach doesn't make us do that, but everybody, every time after weight room was like, let's go run some routes and let's go get better. So, I mean, that's just doing what we can to be around each other and have fun playing football. It's good, yeah.
As you look at your schedule moving forward, so it's a little bit of a different path this year than it's been the last few years. When you guys talk as a team and you game plan from week to week, what from your week to week schedule moving forward, as you start, we talked about this earlier on the show, midpoint of the season, you kind of start talking about how many wins you need to make the playoffs. Where is Newman Catholic at with that? I know we want to win this week and we talk about that, but as you look at your schedule, what are the important games there on your schedule that you're circling and saying we need this one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say this next week is pretty much going to be the conference championship. I mean, Alman Bancroft's a good team, and we know we pretty much need to win out, and this is going to be our toughest test for the rest of the year, for the rest of the regular season. So we know that this is the biggest game of the year. We've been saying it all week. Coaches have been saying it all week, that this is the biggest game of the year, and we need to be ready to play and be ready to execute on Friday.
You have a follow-up? Yeah, you got to look like you're going to ask them or not.
You're good.
Okay, we'll come back to this week's game in a little bit, but we want to kind of spread our wings a little bit and talk a little bit more outside of football in terms of Newman Catholic, because when we ever have kids from smaller schools, it is different than, say, playing at a school as large as Stevens Point or even DC Everest or the Wausau schools. What are the advantages that you have found at Newman Catholic?
Well, it's cool because, I mean, we have a high school of around 100, right? So everybody knows each other in the hallway. I mean, everybody knows who's in what sports and what's going on with everybody. So, like, we're all kind of like a tight-knit family. So, I mean, we know that, like, at volleyball games, everybody's showing up to the volleyball games because we know that we need to if we want to support, those people. So everybody's friends and everybody knows each other, which is cool to have. It's a different experience for sure.
What do you guys do together with that friend group? What do you guys do when it's not sports related? What do you do in your free time? What do you like to do away from football?
I mean, we love going out to eat and stuff, usually after sports games and stuff, celebrating that, and just hanging out and having a good time, I guess. Yeah.
I know you're very much a multi-sport athlete. What are the other sports that you're involved in?
I'm in baseball. Football and baseball, and then I play golf kind of like on the side, not for school and stuff.
And I know baseball is really big for you. You pitched, obviously, as well for the Cardinals. Would you almost say that because your dad is the head coach, are you almost more of a baseball family than a football family? I don't want to cause any trouble, but I know baseball is big within your group, isn't it?
Yeah, it is for sure. I mean, my brother's a D3 pitcher down in Dubuque, Iowa for Loris. So yeah, I mean, we like baseball for sure. It's definitely something that we've grown up doing out in the yard, playing catch with my dad and stuff. And something that's always been a part of our family for sure.
Who's your favorite head coach? No, I'm not going to ask it. No. I withdraw that one.
That's dangerous.
That would be a terrible question.
We can't even.
I'm going to let him take over here because that one. I don't know if I'd be allowed back. We can't let you answer that question.
We can't even ask you who your favorite athletic director is this year. That's a tough question.
That's right.
Too.
I know.
So, you talked about your brother in college. You talked about the different things you like to do. What is it your plan for after high school, both academically? Are you looking to play a sport at the next level? What are your options and what are you thinking about?
I don't know if I'm looking to play a sport after high school. I mean, maybe I still got senior year and stuff to get through, but we'll see how that goes. I don't know if that's something that I really want to pursue, but I definitely want to go to college, that next level of education, and maybe getting out of the state. I don't know, exploring around and stuff. That'd be cool.
What's your favorite class?
Favorite class, I like science a lot and I like history a lot. History, I like learning about the past so we can make the future better. That's something I like to say. So yeah.
That's a good answer. That's impressive. We don't always get great answers to that question. So nice job with that.
Thank you.
What is the leadership role in the team? Obviously, that's probably the wins, the X's and the O's, the talent, all that stuff that went away. But I would say with that group, they were all seniors and they'd been together a long time. So there was, in addition to maybe a complete turnover in talent in different positions and playing different positions, there's probably the one of the biggest voids was leadership. What do you view as your role as a leader in the program?
I mean, I think that I'm one of the biggest leaders we got. I mean, I play quarterback, and sometimes I'm a middle linebacker and stuff. So, I mean, my role is to make sure everybody's going where they're supposed to go, everybody's fired up, everybody's enjoying what they're doing, and everybody's having a good time.
Where do you have to get better? Because obviously, I mean, as you said, you're still a junior. You still have room to grow. What are the areas that you feel like you have to be better at, both offensively and defensively?
I would say defensively, I think open field tackling, I'm not bad at it, but even in that Three Lakes game, I think, or Florence game early on, I had some open field tackles that I missed where I just need to break down and wrap up just a little bit better, I think. And offensively, I think rolling around, I'm good to my right. To my left, I can improve a little bit, and also getting reads better. Because there's usually Miklik is an outstanding coach, and whenever he draws it up, usually the first read is there, like 90% of the time. But I mean, that sometimes when it's not, I need to make sure I can get to that next level and maybe get to the next guy. But yeah.
By the way, every play that Paul designs is designed to go for a touchdown.
That's right. Yes, sir.
like all great coaches, that is a great trait. Working on your reads. I know that Coach Miklig and has you guys watching film. What role does that play? How much time do you spend watching film from the time the game's over on Friday or Saturday, kind of learning from that game and then game planning moving forward? How much film is involved in your weekly routine?
A lot. I mean, after the game, I always go home right away, and before I take a shower or do anything, I sit down and I watch the entire game film from start to finish. Of what we just played, and then throughout the week when we get the film for the next team we're going to be playing, I'll watch it if I have a free time in study hall or something. I'll get it on my phone or computer, or I'll do it at home too, and that's a huge part of it. We'd watch it after Monday and Tuesday, or Tuesday and Wednesday practices, depending. Early on in the week we watch our film, and then the next team's film we're going to play. So it's a huge part of our process as a team to make sure that we're prepared and ready to go where we're supposed to go.
Again, we're talking to Newman Catholic High School junior Tyler Ackermann here on the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. Before we talk again about this week's game, I want to ask you kind of maybe an odd question, because you've played different teams in football than you do in baseball. Do you have a favorite opponent, both in football when you play in the Central Conference, and then you play in the Merriwood Conference in baseball. Mm-hmm. Do you have favorite opponents for either?
Ooh, well, I mean, the one that comes to mind for football is not one that we really play anymore. I mean, I like playing Three Lakes, I think. That's a big one because I did well against them my sophomore year. And then now we lost them and they're a team to beat. So coming up later on this year, hopefully we can get them back. But one that comes to mind is Phillips, because Phillips, this last sophomore year was our only loss in the JV season. Mm-hmm. And my freshman year, I think I got hurt in that game or something. So whenever we have a non-conference or scrimmage against Phillips, I'm always hyped up to play Phillips because they're fun to play. And then for baseball, I think playing Marathon's always a fun team. Mm-hmm. Especially they got Grant Warren out there. That's always special, and they always have good athletes and stuff, and they're a good program. So that's always a fun game that we circle to try to get a win.
And one more baseball question, because I thought, obviously it was different last year because in football you rolled through. There was a lot more adversity on the baseball side, but then in the playoffs, your team was able to make a nice run, and then I probably pitched I think maybe your best game of the season in the playoff game up in Florence. Finishing off that season the way it did, are you able to build on that coming up in the spring?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, every year we're a small school. It's tough if we even have a team. So when we go out and do that, it shows that we can have a team and have a lot of fun. And that definitely builds forward for guys and stuff. I mean, we want to do well in the spring, and we've proven that even if we're small, we can go have some fun and go win some games for sure and be competitive. It's a good time, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned before one of your new rivalries or that you like is that Three Lakes, and obviously a lot of things have to happen before that rematch would come to fruition, but knowing where you started the year, knowing where you are at midpoint and reflecting back on that game, what would be the biggest things you guys would need to do differently to come back and get one against Three Lakes?
I think number one is probably turnovers. I had I had a couple fumbles that game, that's on me. But turnovers and just making sure everybody is knowing where we're supposed to go every play and making sure we're executing to our best ability, because that was our first game of the year and there was definitely room for improvement for sure. And I think that when we got another crack, we can definitely have a good game with those guys, yeah.
Coach Micklich always says over the years that I use the term big too often. That's really one reason this show is called, because he made fun of me, and I said, I'm going to make this the name of the show. But this week is a big game. It really is a big game against Alman Bancroft, and they've played well this season. They placed Florence like you did. They took them to overtime up there. Mm-hmm. They've won 3 games in a row since then. You said it. You guys prepare. You guys are as ready as anybody, I think, when you hit the field on a Friday night or a Saturday afternoon. What have you seen with Alman Bancroft? What are the challenges that they will provide this Friday?
Offensively, they have a pretty solid wide receiver. Number 88, he's a big guy. He's 6 feet 6 inches, I think, around 220 pounds. I mean, he's a good athlete. I think I'll be guarding him. I think, we're going to be trying to shut him down, and they got a good quarterback with a good arm. Just shutting down that passing game, I think, is our biggest focus defensively for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting to know that you're probably one of the keys in the offensive game plan, and then to hear you say that you're gonna match up against their best player on defense. What do you have to do? Obviously, you work hard in practice every day. The majority of your preparation physically comes over the course of the summer in the weight room. You mentioned the speed training and all that. What do you have to do mentally to prepare for a game like this, knowing that you're really not going to come off the field, and the stakes are high on both sides of the ball in regards to the team being successful? So how do you prepare for that?
I think it's being prepared is, like we said before, watching film and paying attention in practice. And Coach Thorpe and Coach Micklich and all of our coaches do a great job printing out a scouting report for us, and they work really hard on that. So we have the tools that we have good tools to be best prepared for games. So just looking at that and listening to them and just being focused and locked in and getting excited. That's what Coach Micklich always said. If you can't be excited, then you shouldn't be playing. So you should be always excited and ready to go.
And is it fun to go on the road for a game like this, where you know that Alman Bancroft is going to be more than ready to see Newman Catholic roll into town? I imagine that there's something about that where, based on the success that the program has had, that there's a big target on the back. I imagine that adds a little to the excitement Friday.
100%. Coach was saying that we're going into hostile territory, and that's nothing better than that. Going to a different town and going and winning, and coming back on the bus with a W is a great experience and something you always remember. So that's something we want to do again on Friday. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would say the fact that the success you guys have had. You've been circled on their schedule for quite a while, and the fact that you rushed for 300 yards last week probably puts a little extra emphasis in their defensive game plan coming in this week as well.
Yeah.
I guess finally we always ask our student athletes, and usually it's a senior, but today we have a junior. But I think it's a little bit different because you've been around. You've played a lot of varsity athletics already. I mean, often when you get to the start of your junior year, you're just starting your varsity experience. Right. But you said it. You've been a major cog both in football and baseball. For younger students or classmates or members of either the football or the baseball program at Newman Catholic, a little advice as they start their journey. What piece of advice would you give to a younger classmate or teammate to take full advantage of the opportunities they'll have with the Cardinals?
I think it's just always doing the right thing. I mean, if you always do the right thing, I think in life and in sports and whatever, I mean, doing the right thing would be listening to your coach. Doing the right thing would be being there for somebody else. So doing the right thing would always get you to where you want to go in life and in athletics and in school and stuff. So I think that would be my message.
Great answer.
Anything else, Coach?
No, congratulations on a great start to your year. I love the fact that you guys are in a position right now to get a big win this week and kind of finish the season out strong. So congratulations on a great start and best of luck this week.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Tyler Ackermann, Newman Catholic High School junior, joining us as our student-athlete guest here on the Big High School Sports Show. We're going to take a break, and we're going to look ahead to the action this week. We will talk about Newman Catholic and Almond Bancroft and everything else going on in high school football here this weekend. It is the Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO, and on the Civic Media app. Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230. Online at bullfallsradio.com. Mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO. And on the Civic Media app. So, again, 2 for 2 on our guests. We always like that. We like it when they're 2 for 2. Al Fredricks, the D coordinator in the first hour from Antigo, and then Tyler Ackermann. And again, you said you didn't realize for a moment he's only a junior, but he carries himself so very well. And again, being put into a leadership position for the Cardinals as they try to continue the success. And it's not easy when you have nobody coming back and you still have that target because everybody still wants to knock them off. I mean, it doesn't change because a lot of those 10 seniors all graduated, but Tyler and his teammates are handling things very well.
Not to mention what a challenge it must have been. I know how much you love polls, especially preseason polls. But for them to have been obviously they earned the right to be a preseason number one, even though it probably wasn't justified based on the turnover. But that's quite a transition that they've had to go through because I'm sure a lot of people expected Newman to still be Newman. So to weather that early storm and to kind of, like I said, right the ship and get going, great young man, good leader for that team for a couple of years to kind of as they look to rebuild and get back to where they were.
Let me ask you, because you coached at West, obviously a Division I school, and you coached at Northern Pines, which is a smaller school. At Pines, did you have to have a lot of two-way players? How did you look at that? And I know you had some two-way players at West, but at the same time, boy, you get a smaller school, it is different, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and it's really the difference between having a team and not having a team and playing games and not. But it's also very interesting, the mindset, because at the end of the day, these kids all lift weights. They all work on their speed and their strength and all these things. But just the different mindset when you come to D1 in a bigger conference and the games, they don't have more meaning, but the opponents are probably different week in and week out as far as a competitive level. And to have those I had some outstanding play. I had just as good of players at North not as many, but just as good players up there, and we ran them into the ground. They played offense, defense, special teams,
and they love it, don't they?
Right, and down here, even and up there, I had a coaching staff of, maybe that's part of it. I had a coaching staff of 4 or 5, so they didn't get to argue about who played on which side of the ball. They knew everyone had to play, and down here, you have a coaching staff of 10, 15, upwards of 20 guys, and the offensive coaches and the defensive coaches are 2 completely separate groups, so they're a little more territorial of their players and who plays. But even at the larger schools, like we talk about, Coach Johnson and I have talked about this even real recently, like a Jake Whalen is back on the staff at Wausau West, outstanding 2-way player. And you kind of have the questions. You look back a couple years ago when Wausau West had Colton Gehrig. Obviously, Colton would have been one heck of a defensive football player for us, was carrying the ball 35, 40 times a game. You lose that playoff game and you reflect back on it and you think, would we have been a better team? Would we have had a better chance of winning had Colton been playing defense as well? And you kind of do that. This year, Ray Reinick for them, I mean, they put Ray at linebacker in practice, and I think the defensive coaches start to salivate a little bit when they see how instinctual and what a great athlete he is. But again, he's kind of your bell cow on offense. But yeah, it's an interesting perspective, and part of me likes the mindset, talking with Al earlier, and the mindset at Antigo. You come into the program and that's what you're doing. You're going to play both ways. That's part of your culture and your character and the toughness of your program. So it's a great thing. And just like everything else, the likelihood of maybe getting dinged up or injured certainly goes up with the more reps you play on the field.
And unfortunately, if you're a 2-way player, 1 injury equals 2 injuries.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, man, I mean, that's one of the keys every year when I see Newman. I mean, you have to stay healthy. You have to stay healthy. You see these teams that have 19 kids on the roster, 20 kids on the roster, like Newman does this season. But you see that in Division 7, in Division 6. You see in Division 5 nowadays, if you watch a game, I mean, some of these schools, I mean, it is truly a thin line. A couple of injuries, all of a sudden, you're going to fall hard.
and I think the hardest thing right now in high school football is having enough linemen, regardless of what level you're at. So that's probably the area where you protect them, if you can, protect them the most. And if you have them, if you need them, you need them. But if you can get away with not playing, because losing one lineman can be really bad. Yeah. Losing one lineman who plays on both sides of the ball might be the difference between winning and losing the game the next week.
Absolutely. Well, let's look ahead, and looks like Friday night will be another warm night. I mean, it's interesting. I'm wondering if we're going to get any cold weather before it's all said and done.
There you go, Chad. You just jinxed it. Bring your rain jackets, everybody.
I know. So, but Friday night expected to be nice and mild, and another nice night for high school football. And let's look ahead. Start with the Valley Football Association, and we're down to 2 undefeateds in the conference, and they will be facing off at Tom Field. I will be there. You will be there, because that's where we are. The Wausau West Warriors and the Stevens Point Panthers spashed 4-1 overall, winners of 4 games in a row, 3-0 in the conference. Wausau West 5-0 overall, 3-0 in the league. Both come off good wins, beating a previously undefeated DC Everest squad with Stevens Point. Wausau West again went on the road against an always tough Marshfield squad and dominated. You got a couple of really good running backs, Smola for the Spash Panthers, Ray Reinick for the Wausau West Warriors. You got I think both got good offenses. Wausau West has a great defense. Stevens Point has a good defense. You put it all together, it really is going to be an entertaining game. And also, I think something I mentioned earlier is Stevens Point's got a lot of experience, and I don't think we can overestimate the importance of having experience on the football field.
No, this everything you said is spot on. This is a huge game, and kind of cliche, but this seems like the type of game that comes down to possessions. So what you do as far as turnovers, both causing them and giving them up, as well as probably special teams going to play an important role. Maybe not from a big play standpoint, but a field position standpoint, and being able, I think at the end of the day, both teams want to run the football in order to win the game, and whoever establishes that sooner is probably going to maybe take the role in that. The other interesting thing about this, if you look at the VFA over the past 2 years, is losing this game is most certainly not a death sentence. As the last 2 years we've had we've had tri-champions and dual champions. So whoever comes out of this undefeated probably just has a bigger target on their back as they play. Both of them will play tough games down the line.
You're right. Nobody has run the table in the VFA the last couple of years, and these two teams would like to do it, but it's not going to be easy for either of them. And also something interesting that you well know, for a long time, Wausau West could not beat Stevens Point. Yeah. Warriors have beat the Panthers the last few years. Does that change the mentality? Because it was always, I tell you, even broadcasting, it always felt like, man, no matter what the records were, Stevens Point was always that kind of, that monkey on the back. But now the Warriors have played very well against Bash the last couple of years.
Yeah, and some of that tradition, it's a big game for both. I think they both had it circled coming into this week and this year, but I think a little bit of that probably changes in Spash having a second-year head coach who maybe doesn't care or know as much about the tradition and the rivalry and can maybe look past some of that. But I think playing at home is definitely an advantage this week.
So you like Wausau West? You have to like Wausau West.
I have no choice, yes. But it should be an outstanding game. I'm really looking forward to it.
It should be. You can catch my broadcast, our radio broadcast, both on bullfallsradio.com, the Civic Media app on Sports Stream 3, but you can also catch the game, my radio broadcast with video on the Wausau West Football YouTube page as well. And also the game will air on a delay basis after the marathon game here on Bull Falls Radio 98.9 and 1230. The DC Everest Evergreens will try to bounce back after a loss last week, their first loss at Stevens Point. Another road game for the Evergreens. Travel to Wisconsin Rapids to take on, again, hard to believe, the winless Red Raiders of Wisconsin Rapids Lincoln. I guess looking at this one, Wisconsin Rapids is a team that's perennially a run-first team, and they still are. And DC Everest looks like they're going to be a team that's going to have to throw the ball to be effective offensively.
Yeah, I think, and this is you hate to say it ever, but this might be a must-win for Rapids. And the fact that they have it at home and Everest is struggling to run the football a little bit can maybe, kind of narrow Tony's game plan a little bit defensively for DC Everest. I think this is going to be a good game. I think a week ago I would have probably said Everest was the far and away favorite in this game, but I think this one might end up being a little closer than we think.
I think Wisconsin Rapids has a chance in this one. I said it off the air that defensively, they still got some studs on that side of the football. Offensively, they've struggled. They got 14. I guess that was a pretty good offensive night last week against Hortonville. But no, I think defensively, this has the feel of a low-scoring game to me. I think that if you get to 21 points in this game, either team will feel pretty good about winning this one.
Yeah, and I think Everest is kind of. They've been competitive. They were undefeated going up until this last week, but they haven't really blown anybody out either. Green Bay early in the year, but they've kind of been, and maybe that works to their advantage. But they've kind of been in those close competitive games all the way through. So I think if it is a close competitive game like that, maybe Everest has the nod. But if they can't run the football, it could be a tough night.
Similar to the 17-14 game against Marshfield 2 weeks ago, I think it's a one-score game. It'll be a very interesting one at Southwood County Stadium in Wisconsin Rapids on Friday night. The Wausau East Lumberjacks will look to make it 2 wins in a row, but they have to travel to Hortonville. Hortonville, right there, they're hanging around. They're 2-1 in the conference. Their only loss was to Stevens Point, so they can't afford a stub toe. They kind of have to win out and beat Wausau West in week number 8 and Wausau East to try to build on the momentum. The offensive momentum against Appleton West, obviously a much more difficult opponent, but Lumberjacks with 2 wins already. And if they find a way, they could put themselves in a position late in the season to actually have playoffs to play for. They've put themselves in a position at this point.
Yeah. Obviously, I think they would struggle to run the ball against Hortonville. We know that the defense is the strength of Hortonville, but we've learned in going up against Hortonville in years past as well that big plays can get the score back under control in a hurry, and East kind of did that against Marshfield a few weeks ago. Weber had 4 touchdown passes last week on not a lot of attempts, so definitely has put some things on film that Hortonville's going to have to deal with. Obviously, Hortonville's favored in this game. Playing at Hortonville is, well, at least for the Warriors, it's always a pain.
It is.
We'll see how it is for the Lumberjacks, but yeah, I think Hortonville's favored in this one, but East could certainly go in there and make some noise.
In Marshfield at Appleton West, again, Appleton West right now is just struggling. They're so young, inexperienced. But for Marshfield, boy, after last week, that's a game that's going to be tough on the psyche. I think they need some good things to happen this week.
Yeah, I would look for Marshfield to score a bunch of points this week. I think they're probably going to chuck the ball around a little bit. Obviously, they need to establish their run game if they're going to win some games and look for that playoff spot at the end of the year. But I think they also will more athletes than Appleton West, and I think we'll probably see that on the scoreboard.
Great Northern Conference, Rhinelander licking their wounds after losing the bell to Antigo last week. Doesn't get much easier. In fact, it gets much harder. Not only they take on Mosinee, but they have to travel to Mosinee, and Mosinee just doing what they do. They've been consistent. They've got that pass game going. They've been Gavin Obrensky's been throwing at a very high percentage in recent games. Jershely has been his number one target. Defense has been putting up really good numbers as well. Boy, this is a tough matchup for Rhinelander. They're going to have to find their run game after being shut down completely last week against Antigo.
Yeah, and one thing I know about a team like Mosinee being in a conference like this, similar to this at Northland Pines, you don't see a lot of passing all the time. I mean, these teams in the Great Northern look to run the football with the exception of Mosinee. So you don't probably spend a lot of time from day one throughout the course of your season working on your secondary, your zone coverage, your man coverage, your pass rush. I mean, obviously they work on that, but this is a tough game to prepare for. And if you don't have the athletes, game planning's one thing. Having the athletes to execute, it's another. So, yeah, that might be a long night for the Hodags.
One of the intriguing games on the schedule because of playoff implications is Lakeland at Antigo. We talked about it earlier. Lakeland was a team that started 0-4 a year ago, then won 5 games in a row, made their way to the postseason playoffs. They've done it so far this year, 0-4 to start, then winning last week against Merrill. And Antigo, 2-1 in the conference. They still have some tough conference games going on their schedule. They would love to get conference win number 3 this week against Lakeland at home.
Yeah, I think Coach did a great job of pointing out what this looked like last year in this matchup, and it kind of was the catalyst for getting Lakeland going. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, Lakeland's only win is against Merrill, who's really struggled on both sides of the ball this year, and I think Merrill also had some opportunities Lakeland actually also had some opportunities to maybe do some things earlier to prove that maybe they're a little better than they are and haven't. So I think I don't know. I feel good about Antigo in this one, especially since it's in Antigo.
Merrill hosting Ashland. Both teams looking for their first win. Obviously, this is, again, struggling teams, a chance to build something positively. Merrill made the playoffs a year ago. It's just been a really tough goal for the Merrill Blue Jays. I'm sure that they really need something good to happen, especially on their home field.
I think this is an offense game for both of them. They both need to find a way to score points. They both really struggled with that. And neither one of these defenses has been great. So I would imagine there's a lot of time being spent offensive game planning by both these teams.
Hayward was feeling good a couple of weeks ago. They're not feeling quite as good now. They started 3-0, then they lost to Rhinelander, and then they fell to Mosinee last week. And again, if you're trying to make yourself feel better, going to Medford is really not the place to go.
No, absolutely not. And when they saw what Antigo did to Rhinelander last week, they're probably not too excited about that game coming up down the road either. So that's probably a tall order for them heading to Medford this week.
We're going to take one more quick break and then come back and look ahead to the rest of the action, including another interesting week in the Merriwood. We'll talk about that coming up next here on Bull Falls Radio 98.9 and 1230. And welcome back. Big High School Sports Show on Bull Falls Radio, 98.9 and 1230, bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO, and on the Civic Media app with Jason Foster. I'm Chad Holmes, continuing to preview the week number 6 action throughout central Wisconsin. Merriwood Conference, again, I think every week we're going to see 3 interesting games out of the Merriwood the rest of the way. Abbotsford is at Edgar. Abbotsford 5-0, Edgar 4-1. Abbotsford, again, impressive. The last two games, I have to admit, I thought against both Iola and against Marathon, maybe the run for the Falcons would end, that they found ways to win both by double digits. But boy, Edgar's playing really good football. When you put up the defensive numbers they did against Colby last week, there's going to be an interesting matchup against that Abbotsford run game.
I took the words out of my mouth. Yeah, I've loved watching what Abbotsford has done with the two running backs all year long, averaging about 300 yards a game. I mean, if Edgar comes out of this game with a shutout, then I think we know that defense is certain. I mean, beating Colby, it's already proven that. But I think that if they kind of keep rolling through this, that's a great win for them and certainly puts them towards the top.
Colby will try to bounce back, but it won't be easy at Pittsville. And Pittsville, again, and we were talking off the air, I've seen them this season, and their offense impressed me. I was surprised, actually. It was a 12-6 game against Auburndale last week. Pittsville has shown the ability to throw the ball and to run the ball so far this season, but this is a completely different challenge against Colby, and you know Colby, good programs and good coaches know how to push the right buttons after a tough week.
Yeah, and honestly, probably one of my favorite parts of being on the show this year is getting to know these conferences and these teams a little bit better. And I would agree with you. These Marywood matchups and down the stretch here are probably the most intriguing games from a conference standpoint. There really is. I mean, there's 5, possibly 6 solid football teams who are all competing for a playoff spot in here, and it will be interesting. I like what Pittsville's done to this point, and certainly I would think Colby's looking to get back on the right track and make sure they claim second place.
Auburndale at Marathon, and the thing about Marathon is they have played in recent years much better at home. They have been very good against teams like Abbotsford and Assumption at home over the last few years. And after that loss, again, that's a tough loss last week against Abbotsford for the Raiders. They really, I think, wanted that one to take that big step towards the postseason. Back home against Auburndale, and again, nobody easy the rest of the way for Marathon. This is a game, again, I think a huge game for Marathon.
Yeah, and got to stop the run. I mean, Auburndale, that's what won the game for them last week. You can't let them get rolling like that. But maybe even to the point Marathon a must win if they want to be a playoff team this year.
And Marathon has offense, both with Cooper Huxtable, who can throw the ball well, and True Thurs, who's now playing more running back. Really impressive numbers so far from a running back the last 2 weeks. So Marathon, I think, offensively is going to be able to do something, but I think you're right. They have to be able to get off the field defensively in order to win that game. CWC Large, again, this week, the Big Four kind of playing, the bottom four. We've seen this a couple of times. Stratford is at Nakusa. Manawa is at Wittenberg-Burnhamwood. Wyowega Fremont will look for a 6th win in a row to start off their season at Shiocton. Amherst at Spencer Columbus. This is the last week where we're not going to see the big teams go ahead. Next week, in fact, next week Whitburn takes on Stratford, if I'm not mistaken, and also Wyowega Fremont will be going up against Amherst. So again, this is almost like the when you're having a big dinner. What is the first part of the? My mind is, I don't go to big dinner, so I have no idea what it's whatever the precedes the big meal in the CWC Large. But if any of those top 4 lose, I would be very surprised.
Yeah, and nothing against any of the other teams, but almost kind of like a little bit of a rest week or a bye week for those big teams as they gear up for those big games down the stretch.
And it's not really against those 4 teams at the bottom half. It's those 4 teams at the top of that league. They're all so good. I mean, They really are. When you look at what Stratford has done, what Whitburn has done this season, what Wyowega has done this season, and just the tradition and what Amherst is, you know they're always going to be tough. So.
Yeah, and comparing it to the Marywood too, that's what's intriguing about the Marywood. Obviously, Edgar's probably distancing themselves, but ultimately those games looks like good matchups week in and week out.
CWC Small, you got Iola Scandinavia. Again, I think that's the team to beat at this point in the league. They challenged themselves against good opponents in the non-conference. They got a nice win last week against Assumption. They will travel to Loyal, the Greyhounds. Again, a program that over the years has been pretty good, but they're struggling right now. So that's a tough one for Iola. You got Rosholt against Webster at Stanley Boyd, and that's a forfeit win for the Rosholt Hornets because Wild Rose has left the conference this season. And then I think the most intriguing game in terms of the CWC Small, you got the Pacelli Cardinals and the Assumption Royals, of course, longtime CWCC rivals. Assumption at home against Pacelli. For Assumption, I don't like using the term must win, but with some opportunities coming up, they will have games still against Loyal and Rosholt. to come. They can still make the playoffs. They'll go a long way if they get a win here today. I should say on Saturday.
Yeah, and probably the same is true for Pacelli. Like that, this is their opportunity to see who they are and where they might step up or stack up against Iola Scandinavia.
And Assumption needs to get their defense going. Again, that's and you said it. I mean, sometimes these smaller schools, you lose the wrong players, and you just have a hole. And the teams that Assumption has played have been able to take advantage of it. And also, again, I want to underline this. I just think it's, you get in a tough situation because of teams not playing 11-player, and you get forced to in these crossovers. In a lot of ways, it's really not fair to the CWC Small because you have teams. Last season, Iola in the conference, they were 3-2. They lost 2 crossover games. They missed the playoffs. Again, it makes it so difficult for these teams where you almost have to run the table in order to be playoff eligible, and it is really, in a sense, unfair for these schools.
Absolutely. Definitely unfair, and also really good that it's realigned and maybe have a different look at it next year.
8-player, and again, a massive game on Friday night. Newman Catholic at Alman Bancroft. As I said, Alman has been very impressive this season. They went to Florence, a team that came to Newman and won by 3 or 4 scores, and they went to overtime up in Florence. They won 3 games in a row since then. Newman has won 2 in a row. I know that the Cardinals are going to be well prepared. They're always so well coached, and they're getting better. And that's one of the things that, as the coach, some teams, you know what they are. They come in, you have an experienced squad, you kind of know where they are. Other teams have lots of room to grow, and you want to see the growth. And for Newman, they've seen the growth. Yeah,
and I really like Tyler's answer to, if you played Three Lakes again, what would need to be different? And I loved what he said, like the number of turnovers they had week 1.
If he didn't say that, I would have been disappointed because 4-0, that's a big number.
Yeah, and their tackling and maybe just overall effort. My bet is they were pretty wide-eyed in that game. A lot of guys getting their first varsity experience. So I think this will be a good test for Newman and kind of show us where these two teams are at.
Other Central Conference games, Port Edwards will try to bounce back from their loss to Newman at Marion Tigerton. Wild Rose again. It's kind of the replacement team within the league taking on Tri-County. And then the CWC East, Thursday, Thorpe is at Greenwood. Athens at Alma Center Lincoln. And the game of the week, I think, in 8-player is Owen Withee and Gilman. They played some massive games in the Cloverwood Conference over the years. Both have had great success in 11-player football, and now they're showing some great success early on in 8-players. That's going to be a fantastic game on Friday.
It's always interesting to me in these games when you look at how they've done against other schools and or other teams and putting up those big numbers. Is there a chance that they come in and they're both good, so it's a defensive battle, or is it just going to be a complete shootout?
When Owen Withee faced McDonald earlier in the season, 2 ranked teams, 2 of the top teams in those entertainment purpose only rankings, it was, I think, a 28-26 game. So more along the lines of what you see normally. Right. I think Owen Withee Gilman have the potential to be a decently high scoring game. But Owen Withee over the years has been a team that likes to run the football. They like to pound the football. And I think Gilman will not be putting up 71 points against Owen Withee on Friday night. We got about 90 seconds to go. As we look ahead to this weekend, I think there's some kind of obvious big games. I think it starts at Wausau West against Stevens Point.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that one. It's kind of interesting when you look at how, kind of like Coach said earlier, how schedules line up and you get a lot of wins early. And I think that's kind of the case for Wausau West. They get a big win here. They gain some confidence moving forward, knowing that they're playing some teams that Spash has already beat. So they beat Spash. They feel good about those games. Wausau West loses this game, it kind of brings into question those, and you kind of go from can we be a 8-1, 9-0 team, or do we have to still worry about being a 7-2 team, and where does that put us for the playoffs when we get there?
And I think another game I'm going to be curious to watch is that Colby-Pittsville game. I've been kind of jumping on board this Pittsville bandwagon after they started 1-5 last season, won 2 in a row to get to the playoffs, and this season started with 4 wins in a row before that 12-6 loss. And always interesting to see a good team, how they respond to a tough week like Colby did.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's Lakeland Antigo. I'm really interested to see obviously Lakeland wins that. They're not in any driver's seat from a making the playoff standpoint. But if Antigo wins it, I think we can start talking about, okay, now there is a team who's ready to maybe take a step forward in the Great Northern.
Well, it was fun again.
Yes, it was.
We'll look forward to coming back next week in a new location.
Exciting.
Absolutely. That's Jason Foster. I'm Chad Holmes. Thanks again for joining us for the Big High School Sports Show on WXCO.